My name is Shay Tanis, and I am the Associate Director for the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities, and I want to welcome all of you here. This is going to be by far our largest conference that we have ever had, with over 750 registrants. And where I want to show you different slide deck. My slide deck, please. We have representatives from over 38 states and 8 countries here today. So I think there's a big applause for that. So welcome. So those that have traveled far and those that have traveled near, we have a wonderful representation here today, and it really does speak to the passion behind those folks that are here that are eager to advance the rights of people with cognitive disabilities and ensure equal access to technology and information. We have a wonderful program prepared for you today. It is a full and packed agenda if you've had a chance to look at your agenda already. We will be starting off with a keynote by Dr. Timothy Shriver, and then we will move into some panel discussions. And then this afternoon and this morning, you will have an opportunity to see two, and I know it's going to be a really hard choice, 2 of our 26 breakout sessions. We have fantastic breakout sessions. I encourage you, in your materials, you'll be able to see where those breakout sessions are, as well as what the topics are. There's a pamphlet in there that will describe each of those breakout sessions, which will help you to make that very difficult decision as to what you will attend. Our room today is filled with self-advocates, with family members, with providers, with legislators, with professionals, but really those that are passionate. And I want you to take the opportunity to meet with one another and network, because that is one of the greatest opportunities we have here. Is to be able to network and work together. We also have representatives from industry who are looking to reach out to this community and get some information and ensure that we can really improve the access to everyone. So I encourage you to do that. Let me see if I still don't have my slide deck. Apologize for that. I want to be sure to thank our generous sponsors this year. We have Anchor, who many of you will be attending the Anchor AAIDD conference tomorrow, and we're excited to partner with them again. Both of those groups, you can see them up here. We also have the ARC as a sponsor this year, and Alliance, and so we want to thank those sponsors for certainly supporting this effort. So please thank them for me. Wonderful, nice slide deck. Here, I wanted to show you this as I was advancing. Here are the states that are represented here, and you can see where we have people coming from. And it's quite amazing to see how this conference has grown through the years and how we'd advanced in terms of being a small conference and now just booming and taking over the country. And so, yeah, we're taking over the country. So I'm very impressed, and I wanted to share that with you. And you can see, kind of, our countries at the bottom. My job here as part of the MC is to give you some of the logistical information before we start into our really dynamic program. I want to let you know that there is wireless connections. As a technology conference, we have wireless. On your program, on the very back of your program, you will see a bottom line that then has the wireless connection. Coleman 15, password inequality. So please feel free to use that. This year we've also tried something new due to the large numbers. What we're doing is we are doing lunch tickets. So we encourage you to make sure that you do get a lunch ticket, the lunch ticket booth. And being in sunny, beautiful Colorado, we're going to have an opportunity to eat outside. So the pavilion is one of those areas in which you can eat outside. So I just wanted to let you know that that's a nice option today. It should be about 71, but it will be a beautiful day to have outside. We also have a very large attendance of teachers and educators, so I'm pleased to see that. I know some of you are here to get certificates of attendance. You can receive those at the end of the day. But, really here we are so excited to be able to continue the work that started, the 25th anniversary of the ADA is this year. And there's a lot that we have accomplished through the years with the ADA. But there's also a lot that we still have to accomplish. And you know, that is part of the work that we're doing to advance those rights are still here in the room today. And we have a lot of work to do, and I know that's why many of you are here, to progress that work and to make sure that we do have equal access to everybody to information and technology. So thank you. I am going to now, it is absolutely my pleasure to hand the mic off to a leader who really does not need any introduction. Dr. Braddock has really turned the Cullman Institute into an international entity that people come to. And it really has been through his leadership and work that we are able to see such a wonderful conference here today. So without further ado, where is he? I'd like to introduce Dr. Braddock.
Good morning, everybody. I was awfully worried there I were going to cover up my slides when I do my presentation shortly. That would be a catastrophe for me because I can't communicate with language. It requires overheads and so forth. I'm here to introduce really, I think, the best speaker we've ever had here. Not that he's going to give the best speech today, but overall he's the best speaker we've ever had. So I want to give him a little bit of tension so that he gets his game face on by challenging him a bit. He only does this all over the world, all over the United States. And I've had the honor of watching him grow through the years. And Tim, I think, is the leading leader in our field at this point with the greatest size of challenge to deal with, and that is the world. And it's worldwide Special Olympics. And how many of you got to attend or at least watch the worldwide Special Olympics this year? Right, that's right. And so the bio tells me that he's chairman of Special Olympics, of course, serving 4 million people with athletes in 170 countries, if you can manage that, all working to promote health, education, and a more unified world through the joy of sports. And that really is the essence of Special Olympics. It is a sports organization, but the sport leads to everything else that's so important that I'm sure he'll be talking about. Before he joined the Workaday with Special Olympics in 1996, he was and he remains a leading educator focusing on all the social and emotional factors in learning. And there are a lot of them. And it's an area that's ripe for continuing and rather dramatic growth in the course of the next several years. He co-founded and currently chairs the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, the leading school reform organization in the field of social and emotional learning. He's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and a non-executive director of WPP PLC. I've known Tim for many years now. There's no person in our field that I admire more than Tim Shriver. Come on board.
Oh, I may need that. I'll get confused with it or without it. Thank you, David. Those words were terrifically humbling to me. I think everybody in this room knows that David Braddock, almost around the world, would be considered the dean of the field of intellectual disabilities, a founder of so many of its trends, a champion of so many of its insights, a trainer of so many of its scholars, an influencer of so many of us who consider ourselves practitioners. So Dave and I have been on the board of Special Olympics together. I'll never forget when I was approaching him about 15, maybe more years ago, and I said, Dave, can you think of a scholar? We really need researchers. We need to infuse the worlds of action and research more closely together. Do you think there's any chance we could get one of the top scholars in the field to consider coming onto the board of Special Olympics and helping us in that project? And I remember exactly where I was standing. It was out at the conference, the Surgeon General's conference. And he looked at me and he says, you know, I'd be willing to do it if you wanted me to. And I was like, you're kidding. You know, I was like, you know, yeah, I wouldn't even have dreamed of asking him. But anyway, we've had a chance to work together, travel all over the world together. And now he serves as the chairman of our compensation committee. So those of you who deal with boards know how powerful he is in our movement. But it's really an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here with the Colemans, with Bill and Claudia. I mean, this institute is the global center of thought leadership and soon even more active leadership in promoting a grassroots commitment to the use of technology, to the empowering use of technology to move our field forward. The Coleman name stands above really almost any other name in the world now in terms of being committed to and invested in our population. So to be with both of you and to be here at this center that you founded together with Dave is a real honor for me. I don't know whether we can start with the state of the state or the state of our own internal states. But it's great to be back here at the hub of so much great scholarship and action. I wonder, you know, it's a gorgeous day outside, and I'm sure there's at least half of you in this room thinking, should I be in here, or should I maybe sneak out and take in the beautiful weather here in Colorado? I wouldn't blame you at all. If I go on too long, just feel free to go right out the back door. Because part of what I want to talk about is what it means to be fully alive. And I want to start with, you know, I got a chance to meet many of you downstairs, but I want to start with thinking about this not as a book, but as a question. So I want to, Dave mentioned that I spent some of my career in education. I want to invite you into this conversation, not so much to tell you about being fully alive, but to ask you. And I want to ask you very pointedly. You're not going to have to write down an answer, and you don't even have to share it. But I want you to come into the room, not just physically, but emotionally, and maybe even spiritually, and ask you to answer the question, what is it for you that makes you feel or be fully alive? The quote is a quote from an ancient theologian who says, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. But that's much less a statement, again, than it is a question. And so I wonder for some people I've had a chance to talk to, they point to something in their past. Well, I was fully alive when I was with such and such, or when I was a child, or when I was with my mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, partner. I can remember when I was fully alive. Maybe your answer locates some part of your past, or maybe, I think for a lot of us, we think, well, I could be fully alive if I just had one more thing, or if I just had that one additional chance or job or friend, or if I could just get a little more financial stability, then I'd feel fully alive. I was asking this question to another friend who said, well, it reminded him of the time when Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell were together in 1969. I think some of you are old enough to remember those names. They went for a coffee in Los Angeles and went home and wrote the song, Our House is a Very, Very, Very Nice House. Remember? Yeah, there's some people who are old enough to remember. I could probably get us all to sing Two Cats in the Yard, Life Used to Be So Hard. Now everything is easy. Maybe that's what it feels like to be fully alive, some kind of a domestic, familial, protective place. Maybe you remember some place like that, or maybe you have a different image. I don't know. I do know that when I started to go out on this book tour, I was reminded of a story my uncle used to tell about doing a tour with his book, where he was in a hotel very much like this one in Texas, and this is my uncle Ted Kennedy, and he was down on the ground floor going up to the third floor to speak at the conference center. He got on the elevator, and there was a guy with a 10-gallon hat and cowboy boots and big silver belt buckle. And the guy looked over at him, about 6'4", looked over at him and said, "Did anybody ever tell you you look like a Kennedy?" And so it was a short ride in the elevator. So I was like, well, how to answer. He said, well, actually, yeah, I've heard that before. And the doors opened up, and the guy turned to him and said, man, that must really piss you off. So there's all different ways, I suppose, of being fully alive. But anyway, back to the question. I hope you've had enough time in this moment to locate your own experience with this question. This book is in some ways my attempt to dig down deep into my own heart and soul and try to figure out my own answer. And so if you've got your own answer, you don't have to read the book. The book is only worthwhile if you're looking for a companion in the search. I spent a lot of my time, the last 25 years or so of my life, kind of conducting this search, trying to discover what it would mean to be fully alive, working in communities of great diversity. We have labels for them: people with intellectual disabilities, people with autism, people with Down syndrome or Williams syndrome, all these kind of things. I just think of it as being thrust into communities of enormous ranges of gifts and being offered the chance to ask myself this question by encountering the answers that people brought from many, many different walks of life. I grew up, in some ways, seeing the answer as being quite straightforward. Fully alive meant being President of the United States, or Senator, or Supreme Court Justice, or Nobel laureate. I mean, there were so many people in my childhood I was surrounded by who looked like they had achieved the ultimate achievement. I'm sure some of you sit here and think to yourself, well, if I was awarded the highest prize in my field, whatever that is, then, wow, I'd be up on the podium, I'd have the gold medallion, I'd be able to stand and say, I finally made it. Well, I grew up seeing a lot of people who looked like they had finally made it. And then I found myself in a completely different community where it looked like, on the outside, it was the exact opposite. People who were not likely to be decorated in those ways, and yet offering some very, I think, profound opportunities to think differently. One of them took place where this picture was taken. This is one of our big Special Olympics events. This is the World Games in 1995. The stadium is the Yale Bowl. The guest of honor is President Bill Clinton. He's attending for the first time. A seated president comes to the games. The security wasn't great, so they kept the president at the top of the stadium to give his speech. He wasn't able to go down on the field. So if you've got good eyes, you can see on the Jumbotron, he's being projected, but he's actually standing at the very top of the stadium. And down on the field, you've got about 6,000 athletes in the Special Olympics movement who've come from all over the world. And in those days, one of our sponsors gave each of them a camera. This is before, when we had cameras. Does anybody remember? Yeah, again, I think the demographic here. You remember those cameras, right? Yellow cameras, you take them back and they give you the film, and they actually get a picture, a piece of paper. It's on a paper, and you put it up in your house. I know it sounds like way the old days, but anyway, down there they are in the field, and one of the professional photographers who's given his time to help capture looks over and he sees a group of the athletes. He concludes they're from an African nation because they're dressed in beautiful, colorful outfits and so on. He sees they've got their cameras up to get a picture of the president way up at the top, takes a closer look and notices all of them, about 12 or 15 athletes, have the cameras up like this, but the lens is pointing backwards. And it's on their nose. And so he realizes they've never used a camera before, and they're wasting all their film getting pictures of their noses. So he goes over, doesn't know if they speak English, says, look, you're trying to get a picture of the president way up high, athlete, and he says, you just have to, shows him, turn it around, and then you look through this hole, push the button, you'll get a good picture of the president. And the athlete says, oh, thank you. He says, you know, but if you look through the viewfinder backwards, you can see the president because it works just like binoculars. Thank you. Now, I love that story because it's so disarmingly jarring. Photographer was a good guy, right? He wasn't a bad guy. He was a good guy, well-intentioned. He looked over, and what did he see? He saw a disability. He probably saw, maybe at an unconscious level, He just assumed. Like so many of us, he looked over at someone else, and he got him wrong. How many of us look at one another when we wake up in the morning, when we go to work, when we come to a conference, and we try to make snap judgments, and we get each other wrong? We misread. We misjudge. There was a certain sense in which I like to think that photographer, who, by the way, told the story with great pride, because it moved him so much, that he had learned and opened himself, that he had discovered in his own lens, if you will, a certain shadow, a certain set of assumptions, a certain fear, maybe a certain barrier that separated him from seeing clearly. He was, in some ways, the person who was out of focus. Today, I think more than ever, we are desperately in need of a culture of encounter, of contact, of connection. We are living increasingly in times where our children are telling us in their behavior that they are beyond stressed out, almost traumatized by youth and development, by school and growth. The data that we see from our young people is the highest rates of depression and anxiety ever measured in the United States in particular. We are desperately in need of opportunities, of movements that invite us into deep encounter and to inclusion in a way that we have only begun to imagine. And it is my own belief that our communities, our movements, the places where we live and work and play, whether it be in employment settings, in residential settings, in recreational settings, in educational settings, we carry the capacity to bring people more closely together. It is in some ways the mandate of our time. There have been mandates of the past, the mandates to close institutions, mandates to change physical space, mandates to improve services. But now, in my view, the mandate is social, it is relational. It is to break down the barriers that separate our lenses, our capacity to see one another clearly, and to do so in a way that invites a whole new flowering of personal and social development. My own family story is known to some of you, but I'll share just a little bit because at least in my own discovery, I learned different things that I thought I knew. This is my mother's family. My mom is the person all the way to the left. Her name was Eunice Kennedy, and that's her 8 brothers and sisters. In the middle is her dad, and just to the side of her youngest brother, Teddy, is her mom. Next to her is her brother, Jack. And next to him is her sister, Rosemary. Rosemary, as some of you know, had a difficult delivery at birth and probably had some loss of oxygen to the brain. And several years after, when she first went to school, the teacher sent home the notice that her daughter had mental retardation. And my grandmother wrote in her diary that night that she was heartbroken. She was heartbroken to find out that her daughter had this label. Heartbroken, I'm sure, to conclude that the society, the culture, would have no room, no place for her. Heartbroken in some ways, I'm sure, for her daughter, that she would struggle. Maybe even heartbroken for her other children and for herself and her husband, that they would have to struggle, that they would have to be challenged by this. My mother would tell the story over and over again of her own mother calling on the phone, asking for help, looking for doctors, looking for teachers, looking for tutors, looking for aides, and putting the phone down, and her mother's voice would trail off, "There's nothing for Rosemary." And then the voice would trail off, "Nothing, nothing, 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 nothing." My mother would tell that story right up until the end of her life, almost like a traumatic memory from childhood, almost like a recovery still underway. The big decision in those days in the 1920s, if you can transpose your mindset, it's quite painful at times to do this, but to that time of eugenics, time of institutionalization, time of forced sterilization, time of Supreme Court decisions authorizing it, the big decision for those two parents was what to do with Rosemary, whether to send her off or to include her. And probably, in my view at least, the most important decision they made as parents, they decided to include Rosemary. Whether it was the heartbreak or the resolve, whether it was the fear and the shame or the love and the connection, they decided to keep her at home. And so these children, all 8 of them, grew up together with a sister with an intellectual challenge. This is a picture of my mom and her sister traveling in Europe in their 20s. This is well after the period during which Rosemary couldn't find a school, was homeschooled in effect, was moved from place to place year after year. But there they were, sisters traveling together, writing letters home, sharing stories, going out to parties. And here's a picture, actually I just found this picture about 2 weeks ago of Rosemary with her brother Jack. I don't know where this one was taken, I assume it's at Cape Cod, and I don't know the date. But as you can see, they grew up together. And the question I sort of tried to ask myself is, what happened in these encounters? What happened in these pictures to these brothers and sisters? What was the impact of this child, Rosemary, on her brothers and sisters? There's a lot of folks in this room who are big advocates and leaders in the sibling networks and the sibling work, which I think is so important. Here's a picture of 2 siblings. So later in life, actually only about 6 years ago, my Uncle Ted used to come over to my mother and dad's house for dinner on Sunday nights in Washington, and I would go over, my wife Linda and I, with all our kids, and one night at dinner on a Sunday night, kids are running around, and I decided to ask the question to Teddy and to my mom. I said, what effect do you think Rosemary had on you as people? I said, not on passing the ADA or not on legislation for IDEA or 94-142, but on you as a person. What effect do you think she had? And these were not, I don't know about your family, but we didn't often ask those kinds of questions. I mean, maybe some other people. Any other Irish families? We don't sort of, it's not necessarily a strength of our ethnicity. But anyway, so my uncle looked up at me and he kind of gave me one of those looks like, what the hell are you asking me that for, But then he said, I remember. He said, I remember one time we were in Palm Beach when we were young. And we got asked to go out to a party, and he said, Uni, you were there, and Jack was there, and I was there, and Mother and Dad said, you take Rosemary with you. And we went, and we were at the party, and it was near a pool, a beautiful day, a lunch, and all the young people were there milling around and having a good time. And I looked up, and I saw Jack. He was over with all the pretty girls. And I looked over, and I saw Rosie. And she was sitting down at the end of the pool, all by herself with her legs in the pool. And he said, I looked over, and I saw Jack get up. And he left all those people, and he walked over down to the end of the pool where Rosie was. And he sat down next to her, and he put his legs in the pool. And he says, I just saw them over there together, alone. And he says, I'll never forget that as long as I live. And then he says, can I get some dessert or anything? Is there any food? But I thought, what a fascinating clue. Here he was in his, just towards the end of his life. And the snapshot that stuck with him was of his brother moving away, connecting again with his sister, of his sister, in effect, inviting his brother away. 15, whatever it is, we don't know exactly, maybe it was 20 years later, Rosemary would disappear. She had this operation which went terribly wrong. And that brother would be the President of the United States, arguably the most powerful man on earth, you could say if you looked at it a certain way, and arguably one of the most powerless people on earth. And yet, what does he say when he gets there? What's he most well known for? He's most well known for words that captured an idea of connection, of encounter. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We know these words, many of us study them in history books, and they're beautiful rhetorical words, and they change the tone of a nation in some ways. People hearken back to that as maybe that was a time I wish we could recover. I think to myself, it could have been, ask not what you can get from others, ask what joyful part of yourself you can discover when you give yourself away. Really, the encounter with Rosemary is, in my view, the only explanation for where those words come from. Because he had to know at some level that when you give yourself away, you get something far more powerful in return. That the giver-receiver relationship is a strange alchemy that is reciprocal and mutual and extremely powerful, moving in both directions. The same thing the photographer learned. The same thing John Kennedy and Rosemary Kennedy learned together as brother and sister. The same thing he tried to teach a nation in just those few words. Stop asking what you can get from everybody else. Stop bringing to politics or to government or to society your demands, your eagerness to gain, to grab, to get. Instead, give. And boom, almost just like that, the country is awakened to some new realities. By the time he was inaugurated president, the picture of his family does no longer include Rosemary. Why? Because there was the fear that in exposing her, it might damage his political reputation. But she did not leave. She didn't leave the scene. This is the picture of the president signing. Dave Braddock has written about the reports that followed from the president's panel on mental retardation in those days, which launched the series of recommendations that produced the university-affiliated programs, the initial stages, initial recommendations to begin to close institutions, the initial recommendations to begin to try inclusive education, the initial recommendations to promote supported employment. Now, obviously, we're moving beyond that. But there it is, another brother and sister, opening the eyes of the nation to the idea that people who are different could be included in powerful ways. This picture then fast forwards up to the creation of the Special Olympics movement, which I like to think of as one of the great experiments in reversing expectations. If that photographer in 1995 had been on this field, I think he would have seen the exact same kinds of encounters. Remember the audacity of using the word Olympic in 1968. The audacity. People who came to this event from, for instance, the state of New Hampshire were not allowed to leave without the governor's permission to be allowed to leave the walls of the institution and travel beyond the state. They had to get an official permission from the governor. That's how restricted the worldview was. They were Olympic. I mean, you had to realize how crazy people must have thought that was. The idea, fastest, strongest, the greatest, the icons of the human experience, the icons of the human body, the greatest achievers. Were those people bedraggled, forgotten, excluded, lost down on that field? We have from that, even that first games, one of these stories. I just saw it on an ad last night, sponsored by Phil Anschutz, the story of the athletes who are running, maybe it was a 400-meter race, and down the final 100 meters they go. The athlete in first stumbles to the ground. All the other athletes charge by except the runner in second, who himself would have been the winner, who stops. Now try to imagine you're 14 years old. You're living in an institution. You train in that institution to come to go to a race. You get on a bus, you leave the institution, you go to an airport, you see an airplane maybe for the first time, you fly, you stay in a hotel, you land in Chicago, there are celebrities everywhere, there's flags and pennants. You're in an 80,000 seat stadium. You're being cheered maybe for the first time in your life, and the finish line is right there, and you're going to cross it in first place. And what do? You stop, turn around, pick up your buddy, and cross the finish line in last place. What was it? Was it last place or first place? Already we begin to see, when we unleash the possibility of recognition and hope and belonging to people with intellectual challenges, we see new definitions emerging. Winning, not necessarily where you finish, but how you finish. Not necessarily who you beat, but who you carry. There are different definitions of winning, right? Yeah, there was somebody who got the gold medal in that race, the person who crossed the finish line first, but there was more than one winner. And immediately, the idea of unleashing the human potential in people who had so long been forgotten begins to emerge with new opportunities for recognition. If you think of this young woman, 12 years old, Ajara Silla, from Cote d'Ivoire. I have this picture in my office. It, to me, is such a steady and constant invitation to think differently. There she stands on the 7th place position. Great painters paint beautiful human beings in triumphant positions. Great sculptors sculpt them. Michelangelo created the David, and people travel all over the world to see this beautiful human specimen. I can't find anything that matches Ajara. Probably malnourished. If you look closely, those of you who are medical people in the room, probably, again, at her first finish, but she knows something lots of people don't know about what it means to win, if you ask me. So here we are. We like to think of our movement, and many of you know this, and many of you are athletes in it, and coaches and volunteers and moms and dads, and here we are. This is a picture from one of our events in Rwanda. But we're trying to build a great movement of social encounter where social inclusion is elevated to the top of the world's priorities. It's a movement where we try to celebrate the value of all human beings and celebrate the value of sharing ourselves with one another. Not a service delivery system, not a charity, but a movement of encounter and human transformation. Here's what we look like today. This is not a time to talk about Special Olympics as an organization. I just want you to see this because I'm going to tell you 2 or 3 more quick points before I wrap up about some of the things that are made possible when we prioritize the value of encounter. So the first thing to note is that on the 3rd column over to the right, this is a movement run by almost 1.5 million volunteers, and those are the ones we count. Those aren't the ones that some of you have been to events and you might have volunteered just because you were there. You're not in this number, I'm sorry to say. This is actually the counted number, so the number is actually probably 2 or 3 times that size. What's the conclusion? The conclusion is that if you ask people to give their hearts to something, they want to do it. I mean, most people are really wonderfully good. Give them the chance, and they will do extraordinary things. This is not a movement run by a boss or by a budget or even by a board, I dare say. It's a movement run by the Spirit. People take it and do with it what they can do. They contribute themselves to it. And when you allow people to contribute themselves to a higher purpose, you see the unleashing, again, of enormous possibility. So anyway, I won't go through all this, but just give you a few examples of what can happen. Now, where are we today? We continue to struggle with extraordinary levels of isolation and exclusion for people with intellectual differences. Students with disabilities participate less in school, they have fewer friends, they join fewer clubs. Most people don't know or don't have a class with a peer with an intellectual disability. And most people with an intellectual disability don't know and don't have friends in the general education program still today. Much of this data is known to all of you, but let me just tell you also on the healthcare side, we have an epidemic of injustice. We have people all over this country who are excluded from the healthcare system out of indifference, ignorance, and concern for values well beyond the idea of health justice. Routinely, when we screen people at Special Olympics Healthy Athlete screenings, we find acute levels of pain, disease, and neglect in the healthcare system. We also know from a recent study that my sister did called, can't get it to come up, there we go, called the Shriver Report. This is going to be impossible for you to read, but here's the conclusion. The conclusion is just under half of Americans actually know a person with an intellectual disability. Now here's the good news. If you're in the half that knows someone, your attitudes are far more positive than if you don't, and than if you're not. So when you look at the bottom left-hand corner, the red pencils are the 40% of Americans who do not want a child with a special need in their child's class. 40%. That's down from 60% about 10 years ago. So the trend is good, but the number is still shocking. It is still shocking. Those are almost all people who have had no contact. So the conclusion isn't that complicated in our heads. It's very complicated to execute, but the conclusion is encounter, 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 contact, 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 relationship development, social inclusion. Our challenge is not only high-quality services. It is now, if you ask me, more importantly, high-quality social inclusion. The challenge of our time is relational. It is not physical or professional. So here's what social inclusion looks like at a Special Olympics event. These are doctors, many of whom have never met a person with an intellectual disability. Yeah, they went to medical school, they went to dental school, they studied it in a book, and they don't have any experience. So they come to our games, we set up a tent, they open a clinic, they look in someone's mouth, they check their ears, they check their feet, they check their gait, they check their BMI, they check their balance. And here's what happens. You get doctors who will see an athlete like this. This is healthcare in the United States in the year 2006. Dental care, quality dental care in the United States for a 41-year-old man. But when you get a doctor who has an encounter, this is what he can do. Now, one is injustice, the other is justice. What created the change? Sure, healthcare law helps. Sure, the Affordable Care Act helps. Sure, better training helps. What really helps is encounter. What really makes the shift is that dentist saw, I can do what I went into medicine to do. I can make someone who wouldn't get care healthy. I can change someone's life with my skills. We have so many other examples of this. Now, here's what we're trying to do in schools, what we call in unified schools, Project Unify. Empower young people to be agents of what? Social inclusion. Agents of more supportive school environments. Here's what it looks like. This is my own son. He's in the middle, Sam. On the right is my daughter. This is a few years ago. He's now 23 years old. He doesn't know I'm using this picture either. My daughter Caroline and our neighbor Maureen Yap. Now, when you put the kids together, these kids all played basketball together in our Unified Sports program run by their school. So one day we're driving home from Unified Sports. Sam was a little older than this. He was about 12 at the time. And I was worried, I was thinking to myself, I want to make sure these kids really love this stuff, not just do it because their dad is telling them to. So I said to Sam, and I had my other son there, Tim, I said, what do you think of this unified sports stuff? And we're driving along the road. It's February. It's cold out. We're coming home from an early Saturday morning practice. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. The radio's on. This is when we still had radios. I don't know if anybody remembers those either. And they say, yeah, it's fine, Dad, it's fine. It's three men in a car on a Saturday morning with loud music. None of them really want to talk except me. So I pressed. I said, no, seriously, what do you think? They said, it's fine, Dad. We like unified sports. It's great. So I turn off the radio. They, Dad, what are you doing? Why do you turn off the radio? I said, because I really want your I want your attention here for a minute. What do you really think of this unified sports stuff? And so Sam goes, oh, you're so annoying. He said, I'll explain it to you this way. He says, if you told me we're going to Disney World right now, I'd say this is the greatest thing that ever happened. And I'd go to Disney World, we'd ride on the rides, and we'd have a great time. I have no idea what he's talking about, right? It's nothing at all to do with the question, as far as I can tell. He says, but we'd get home, and that really stinks. He says, then I would hate it. It's like worse than I wish I didn't even go. And he said, so I'm like, okay, I hear you. I've had that vacation thing where you end the hangover and all that kind of stuff. And he says, well, like when we go to Special Olympics, it's kind of like, it's the fun that lasts. And he says, now turn the radio back on, Dad. Well, yeah, I answered your question. Now, I had never heard that. Have you? I was like, the fun that lasts. What's that? What did he learn in those encounters, in that gym, out at the special school, the gym that has no bleachers, the gym that has almost no seating area, the gym that's all indoor, in the back of the strip mall, the gym where people are bouncing the ball and shooting the wrong basket and double dribbling and traveling. And what had he learned that told him that there was two kinds of fun? That he could have some kind of fun that doesn't have an expiration date on it. Just by playing in a space where there was no judgment, maybe, where there was no evaluation, where no one was telling him what he had to do, who he had to be, he could relax. He could be like his great uncle, sitting at the end of the pool. For him, at the age of 12, he already knew there were two different kinds of fun. I mean, he knew that going to Disney World was fun. And at 23, I can tell you, he's had plenty of Disney World fun the last few years. But he also knows there's an alternative. Encounter. When we look at, so I was going to show this video. You want to see what it looks like when kids really get excited about encounters and social inclusion? I'll just show just a minute of this if I can. Oh, let's go back. Oh, there it is.
Hi, I'm Trevor.
I'm Kevin.
This is
Jessica.
Kellis High School.
I'm Taylor.
I'm Tiny.
And I'm Keisha.
And we're from Unified Sports.
In
and we're
Phoenix,
here to teach you a
Arizona.
simple dance called the Cougar-Lute. It's to a song by Attack Attack, and it's 6 simple steps. And if you do it right, it's the best 2 minutes of your life. So here's the first step.
You can
you're
follow
just gonna
along
act
if
like
you
you're
want.
gonna get in a circle, and you're gonna pretend like there's a fire. And this step is basically warming up your soul, warming up your hands. So bounce back and forth and act like you're warming up your hands.
Okay. Come on.
And then when you
do it.
feel the music, which you always will,
You
you're
feel
gonna
the
start
music? Do you
clapping.
feel it?
And next is the Cougar-Lute.
Who's doing the cougar? I don't see anybody out here. You guys, go get some coffee. Go get some coffee if you need it. Go ahead. Now, up and down, up and down. Okay.
When you start to feel the beat change, Robot Ninja.
Uh-oh, let me see it. Go.
Then you're going to bring it down and do the Jersey Shore fist pump. And then you're going to bring it up.
Then we're going to bring it back to the Revenge of the Cougar-Lute.
Okay. Now let's see what happens in this school when you do this. This is all done by the Unified Sports Club
And
at
that's how
Kellis
you
High
do
School.
it.
They created this dance.
So do it.
And they do it at every single school event now. When I was at the school, they had 1,300 kids do the dance all together, all at once. We can move on from the video. I don't know how to stop it, but it's great, by the way. It's on the internet. But here's the other side. We are still struggling with misunderstanding, right? This poster was used to introduce me at grand rounds at a major American children's hospital by the doctor introducing me, who said she took the picture from the wall of the faculty lounge. Right next to it was the poster that goes teamwork, you know, that one. No, this is not a joke. And then the next one down here is inspiration, and then the next one is retards. We all know one. So what's our goal? Our goal is to unleash social connection, encounter. And so we resorted again to the challenge of inviting young people to do this themselves. They've gotten almost 750,000 kids around this country, and at least that number in India also, who've signed a pledge once they learn and understand. But who do they learn it from? They didn't learn it from Tim Shriver. They didn't learn it from Dave Braddock, although they, I'm sure, could have. The most powerful teacher, I don't know how much time I have, I'm sorry. Can I ask for a cue? Do we have time to watch a video or not? Are we out of time? 5 minutes? We don't have time. Oh, well, go ahead. Okay, all right, okay. Now, it's powerful. This is a video that was done by a sibling when she was invited to become a part of the solution. This is the video she made. Let's watch it. I hope you will enjoy it. She made 16 years old when she made this. We need sound. Do we have sound? Sound?
The story of my life I can't quite comprehend. Don't tell me if you know how it ends. When everywhere you go feels like a mirror maze, and you're not sure how you're stuck in this place, and you got nowhere else to go, and you're lost within your own home. And you're trying so hard to win. You keep trying, it's embarrassing. And how you don't even know, but you know you're off the tracks. And how did you get in here? Thinking, how did I get in here? I'll help you break the walls down. I'll help you break the walls down. Bust you out and take you home. Believe you me, you were not alone. I'll help you break the walls down. Does anybody know where February went? I was hoping that by now we would be the end of this. When you open up a book and read 1,000 lines, but you don't really read, you just move your eyes. And you got nowhere else to go, and you're lost within your own home. And you're trying so hard to win. You keep trying, it's embarrassing. And how you don't even know, but you know you're off the tracks. And how did you get in here? Thinking, how did I get in here? I'll help you break the walls down. I'll help you break the walls down. And bust you out and take you home. Believe you me, you're not alone. I'll help you break the walls down. And I know this is random, but just this morning I saw the sun reflecting off the lawn and windows. Oh, I don't know why, but I thought you should know. When you got nowhere else to go, and you're lost within your own home, you're trying so hard to win. You keep trying, it's embarrassing. And how you don't even know, but you know you're off the tracks. And how did you get in here? Thinking, how did I get in here? I'll help you break the walls down. I'll help you break the walls down. And bust you out and take you home. Believe you me, you were not alone. I'll help you break the walls
So, there's so many things I can say about that video. I don't know if you could pick up, there are moments where Regan's face changes quite dramatically. And it's almost always when she has the word but. The world sees, the world sees, but not me. Not me. The music she chose, the structure of her encounter. We need models of inclusion, models of social encounter, models of truth telling that is sometimes painful. We don't have to look far to get them. They're right in this room. They're in your communities, in your centers, in your families, in your schools. We just have to unleash them. We have to remind people of the power of a powerful relationship. Someone who can teach you, as she says, what I should be doing with my life. There's a lot of role models out there come back to Fully Alive. There's a lot of role models. You go to the newsstand, you'll see what your kids, what our kids, what you and I are being told. Look at the cover of the magazines at the newsstand. That's what you're being told, is the people who will tell you what to be doing with your life. You should be like this person on the cover of Forbes, or this person on the cover of People, or this person on the cover of Vogue, or this person on the cover of Time, or the Hollywood Reporter, or the New York Daily News, or whatever it is. You're not going to see Russell there, unfortunately. We have to offer alternatives to the culture. We have to offer different kinds of encounters. We have to remind people that they get their best selves when they give their selves to others. I'm out of time, and I've got so much more material. I'm sorry. But I wanted to share some of these things, but I'll just go very quickly because I know we've got a packed schedule. This is a picture of Nelson Mandela and Ricardo Thornton. Nelson Mandela in prison for 27 years unjustly. Ricardo Thornton in prison for 17 years in an institution unjustly. Neither deserving what they got, both celebrating, as Mandela said, what he learned in the encounters with our athletes, what he was reminded of. The two most important gifts, he told me, humility and simplicity. Simplicity because you need very little to be happy, is the words he said. I would say very little to be fully alive. Humility because he said you realize that the important things in life are not about you. They're about things much bigger than you. He was reminded of those two gifts, humility and simplicity, when he got to hold that torch. That torch is being lit right outside that red block stone above Ricardo's head there. To the left of President Mandela's head is the window of the jail cell where he was imprisoned for 27 years. You wouldn't recognize that as a man standing near the place of his condemnation, would you? Look at that smile. Both of them, people who have endured enormous injustice, but through encounter discovered new and different values. Again, I'd love to share with you the story of Donald Page. It's written up. I've shared, and some of the stuff is in the book, so you don't have to read it now that you've listened to me for a good 40 minutes. But Donald there is in the wheelchair in the lower right-hand corner of the picture. He performed at the 2003 World Games in Dublin. I will only tell you that if we want to create social inclusion, we need to elevate the gifts and stories of all people. It's a message I sometimes miss myself and forget. In that occasion, the president of Ireland said I wanted to come out on the third day of the games to visit the venues, and I thought to myself, let's take her to track. We've got athletes who are running near Olympic times in track, or I could take her to the pool. The pool is jammed with fans, and we've got athletes swimming in near Olympic times in the pool. And the president's office said, no, I want to go to the motor activities, which is people with the most significant challenges, right? What do I think? Oh, she's not going to be impressed. It's going to be a disaster. So we go, and Donald is wheeled in. Donald was healthy at 2, had a massive infection in his brain, was brought home 6 months later after 6 months in the hospital, 3 times getting the last rites of the church. His dad's a dairy farmer. His mom is a mom. They raised him, and at the age of 18, he was brought to Dublin on the bus to perform. His task, it was a room just like this with a riser, not unlike this. His task was to do the beanbag lift. And I arrive with the president. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. What's going to happen? I'm sitting in the front row there where Bill and Claudia are. Donald is put in front of people to do his lift. Quiet, off you go. He starts to move his hand to pick the beanbag up and move it from here to here. Hand won't go. I'm sitting there nervous thinking, oh my God, you're advancing my slides without me. Okay, that's like getting gonged, right? Anyway, the point is, I just want to say that in Donald's case, it took him 18 minutes. By the time he finally got his hand just on the bag, it was almost 3 minutes. To move it, almost 15. By the time the thing was over, the whole place was standing, screaming. I was crying. President of Ireland stood next to me, tears streaming down her face. And I remembered as I stood there that I had it wrong again. You know, that I thought she'd be more impressed if she saw a certain kind of winner. We need reminders all the time. And we need technology. As you all know, the centerpiece of the current worldview is technology. I'll just read to you the quote here in the recent piece by Dr. Braddock and Jeffrey Hole and Shea and Enid Ablowitz and Laura Haffer. They wrote, I quote, "The key question becomes how greater attention to cognitive disability and technology can be generated to promote diffusion of innovation in inclusion, to enhance friendship networks, general social participation, employment, education, health, and communications." The question of our time is how can technology be used to promote social inclusion? It's not to promote likes where there's no friendship and no emotion. It's to promote the other kind of like, the like where there's eye contact, where there's someone reaches out and touches the other person's hand. It's the kind of connection that technology can make possible where people feel empowered to participate socially, to go out into the culture, to work, to live and breathe and have full inclusive participation in the life of the school, to play sports. Have we really asked ourselves the question, how can technology help us on that? This is a brief overview of the work that Special Olympics is trying to do. I think we're way behind. I think we need a whole new generation of apps and a whole new generation of communities where coaches and athletes and families could build their networks and understand and connect with one another and feel empowered to own whatever it is their gifts are and as big and as important as they might be. This is your own declaration. The words in there that might resonated most with me are with deliberate speed. With deliberate speed. They remind me of the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education decision. We have to get after this, not next year, not 20 years from now, not when it gets convenient, but with all deliberate speed. Just as Brown versus the Board of Education said that segregation was inherently unequal. Inherently unequal. We have to recognize today that technology segregation creates inherent inequalities. We have to get after closing those gaps. Maybe the final word should go to one of our self-advocates. This is a picture of Troy Daniels graduating from high school in Vermont. Troy was selected by his class to be the class speaker at graduation. I think he understands quite a lot about what it means to be fully alive. I'll just read you a few sentences from his graduation speech. It was a lot shorter than my speech today, I can tell you that. He says, "My name is Troy Daniels. My friends call me TD. I am a person with disabilities, and when I say my friends, I mean real friends. Just like everyone else, I have friends. Most of you think all people have friends, but for people with differences, friends are not always real. Not too long ago, people with disabilities could not go to school. They could not have real friends. They called people like me retard. That breaks my heart. When I came to school, there is a law that says all kids go to school where they live. I started school with all the senior class. We were little kids together. The law says I can come to school, but no law can give me friends." But then some kids started to think that I was okay. First, it was just one or two kids who were nice to me. They found out that I cared about them. I loved my school. I told them I want to have real friends. Others started to hang out with me, and they found out we could be friends. We started to learn that in some ways we were different, but in some ways we were the same. They called me friend and made sure I was in everything. I care about them, and they care about me. I want all people to know and see that these students I call my friends are the real teachers of life. They are showing you how it should be. Yes, I am a person with a disability. The law says I am included. But it is my friends who say, TD, come sit by me. We have the asset the world is looking for. We really do. We have people who live with the heart. We have people who live with enormous struggle and challenge. Don't get me wrong, it's not all nice and pretty. But we have assets, not needs. We do have needs, but we have assets. We have human beings of great spiritual and emotional and relational strength. And we have a world hungry for them. I don't know what your answer was to your question about what makes you fully alive, but I hope at some sense that you're discovering at least part of what I have been gifted to have teachers teach me, which is that it's not so much what you get or where you are, but how you live. That it comes from how you see the world, not what other people give you. That it can last. You don't have to be in a comfortable place to be fully alive. You don't have to be with your best friend. You can suffer and endure loss and pain and struggle and still be fully alive. It might not be the Joni Mitchell, Graham Nash song. It might be another song written that same year, Born to be Wild. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, do we know how to pick keynoters or not? It's very hard for me right now to go to my script. Puny thing it is. I want to talk about Eunice Shriver. Maybe I'll just tell one little story. I met Mrs. Shriver when I was on my internship, year-long internship in Washington, D.C. in 1971 and 72. And when I finished my dissertation, I got a telegram. Do you remember those? Got a telegram in the mail in May of 1973 when I graduated with a plane ticket to Washington to be interviewed by her. And they ran me around the DC and met some people and so forth. I was very aware at the time that I wasn't ready for that. It appeared that I was because I was a good actor, perhaps. But I did maintain a relationship with her for the rest of her life, and it tied me in a way to the kind of beauty and commitment that you see now in Tim and his family. And I just hope that people who know me realize that much of what I've been able to do in my career has been associated with Eunice Shriver and a handful of others. And I think if we all think about our careers, it's a good, healthy thing to do periodically. We weren't born with the kind of capacity that we have after we've worked in the field all these years. In every case, there's always been key people who've stood out and made you what you are in every way in your field. This is a gentle transition to the focus on inequality and the rights of people with cognitive disabilities to technology and information access. So we'll jump into that. I'm going to do a short presentation because Shay told me so. And there'll be three parts: income and wealth inequality, technology equality, which will be the major basis of this presentation, a special announcement. Inequality is in the news. It's pretty hard to avoid it. Just in the past year, since we last met, the Atlantic, the Chicago Tribune, the Chronicle of Higher Education, the LA Times, the MIT Tech Review, the New York Times, the New Yorker have all published major articles about it. And the issue of inequality and inequality in relation to income, wealth, and technology. It's technology that we're here today to emphasize, but I want to give you a little bit of background of this whole issue with regard to income inequality first. This was the cover of Bloomberg magazine weekly in just a year ago, June 2014. Piketty is an economist, French economist, and he came out with a massive book with a colleague that gave everybody wealth inequality fever, and thus all the writings and the discussions about this. And it was this particular graphic, which is not difficult to understand if you look at the two green lines at the top in 1928 and in 2008, and it points out that 24% of the total income generated in the United States was associated with 1% of our population. It also was that back in the just before the first recession. So very powerful and distinctive bit of data. Inequality in IDD wages for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is actually 40% below all other disabilities. If you'll take a look at this chart from left to right, the average pay that a person with an intellectual disability receives in this country is $8.31. The average that people with all other kinds of disabilities, other than IDD, is $11.60. The poverty level is $11.66. All workers receive an average of $24.55. So people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are working are paid wages that I don't think can be justified. I think this is a fundamental inequality in the way we are treating this population. This is a somewhat strange-looking graphic, but it's really pretty simple. Politics is associated with inequality as well. Did you know that only 158 families to date have donated 50% of the cash currently for the U.S. 2016 presidential race? We have a very, very tiny elite in this country that is driving our politics in a way that can't be healthy. It absolutely can't be healthy. We have to figure a way through this, not to be developed in this presentation, but through the commitment and thinking and hard work of all of us. It's a problem that's got to be addressed. 99.99987% of the households have provided the remaining contributions to the race. Very small amount of America is participating in the proper way. The states have different degrees of inequality in what we call economic momentum. So what is economic momentum? Economic momentum can be mathematized by looking at personal income, employment, and population growth. And if you use this particular collective of statistics and rank the states, you find that right now, Utah ranks with the greatest economic momentum in the country. The numbers themselves are factors that are not meaningful except in relation to all of the numbers in the table here. So Utah is 1.28 at the highest level of economic momentum, and down at number 51, West Virginia is at minus 256. So there's actually a fourfold range between the state in our country with the highest level of economic momentum, Utah, and the state that has the lowest economic momentum right now, which is West Virginia. So we have inequalities that are quite profound even from state to state. This works the same way with respect to nations of the world. I've just selected 10 here. Argentina is the one with the highest Gini coefficient, which means the income inequality is the highest among these 10 countries that I selected. The lowest is Germany. There's a factor of 25% between the highest and lowest in terms of difference. That is between Argentina and Germany. You can see the United States at 41.12 is fairly close to Argentina toward the top. So when we speak about income inequality, this is a manner in which economists do their trade to try to mathematize the relationship. Hidden wealth, offshore accounts would be one example, is also an area where a great deal of wealth, total world wealth, if you might like to know, for the whole world is $95 trillion. 8% of that is not being taxed at all. Some of that, 7.6 trillion, is in offshore accounts. Gabriel Zuckman wrote this book, which has just come out. He is a protege of Piketty. So Piketty's work goes on through his protege, who's looking at a little bit different aspect of income equality. In fact, it's not income equality that he's focusing on, it's wealth inequality. Now, this said, I want to talk about another kind of inequality, a more important kind of inequality to this audience, and this is technology inequality. And without any coaching whatsoever, Tim intuited the notion of technology equality in his presentation. Did you notice that? The inequality that exists with respect to technology was part of his presentation, and we did not talk about this. But one of the leading figures of our movement in developmental disabilities, if not the leading figure, is Tim. For him to get it so quickly with so little coaching, but just inherent insight to the fact that as our country, as individuals, as families, as organizations, as universities and so forth move on this rapid trek toward developing new technologies and so forth, we're going to leave a lot of people behind, not just people with intellectual disabilities, but people who don't have the opportunity to be able to receive training and support and access to technology. So here at the Coleman Institute, our biggest concern, as I see it going forward, is addressing this issue of technology inequality. And it's a very big task, I think, to think about effective ways to tackle it. We know it's going to be a long run. We know it's never going to stop being a long run because technology will be with us always for the future. It will have greater depth, greater impact on society, greater impact on individuals, greater impact on families, greater impact on economic health. So I want to tie the idea of access to technology to the law through the Olmstead decision. The Olmstead decision was the U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1999 that it provides the legal basis for community participation today. The court did not specify, of course, a right to technology access in its ruling in 1999. There wasn't enough technology to influence the court to do so. What if that litigation was taking place now? What do you think the chance would be that they would be excluding technology as a support a community support, an individual support that individuals needed to have a right to in order to facilitate movement to and integration in the community. I think it's pretty highly likely that if another case ever comes along in which there is an extension to the thinking in the Olmsted decision, we may find that technology and the access to technology that people could use to facilitate their capacity to move into community settings would be greatly enhanced. I haven't seen this particular connection made by anyone else yet, and I thought it was time to let this audience know that we must take a look at the fact that this particular piece of litigation is the strongest, most forceful commitment that our country has made in judicial law in relation to integration into community living. We want to remember that technology needs to be integrated into that ruling if there are other cases that come along that gives us the opportunity to emphasize it. So you heard Tim mention the rights of people with cognitive disabilities to technology and information access. What kind of rights are these? Right now, they are not rights. They are postulated rights. We as a group, we as a community in the Coleman Institute conferences have promoted the idea that there are or should be such rights as our society becomes greater and greater, more dependent upon technology. And also given the fact it's just very good business because we can do a better job in supporting people with technology in some respects than we can surrounding them with workers who attempt to do so all day long. And we have a lot to learn. So, whereas 28 million people in the United States citizens have cognitive disabilities such as IDD, severe and persistent mental illness, brain injury, stroke, neurodegenerative orders, such as Alzheimer's, people with cognitive disabilities are entitled to inclusion in our democratic society under federal laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's as simple as that. And this is the declaration. I'm really pleased to see that Tim put this in the tail end of his presentation. Explicitly, even though I'm on the board of the Special Olympics, I have not done anything to encourage the Special Olympics to adopt the declaration. And I'll tell you why. The reason is, for one thing, it's such a massive organization. The other one is that I want to be sure that we will be able to provide them with the kind of technical assistance to be successful. That requires us to do a deeper dive in our thinking with regard to the implementation of an organization of that size. And I think that we need to think about how we're going to help with implementation, not just with the Special Olympics, but with all the other organizations across the country that might wish to embrace the declaration. It's in that spirit that I'm going to give you a little update of where we are. We have 289 organizations that have endorsed the declaration to this date, and 525 individuals. This is a map that shows where the endorsers come from. 59 is here in Colorado. It's the largest. And the strange state of Illinois is the second largest at 42. And Maine, you're right, that's the one I was supposed to mention too. And I should, because one in every 10 people have signed, right? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. But Maine has this, and other states have the same number of legislatures that Maine's got, one. And so we have a great example here, and we have a great example in Colorado. So it can be done. The question becomes, who's going to be motivated to do it? And who's going to help who's going to be motivated to do it, and we're going to help. And the way we're going to help, here's just a list of all the states. I won't belabor you on that, but these are all the individual endorsements, 525 that we have. You can see the numbers there, 181 in Colorado. Two state legislatures, as I mentioned. Illinois will be introducing something in the next session. We've begun to advertise, and we had this particular presentation in the Special Olympics World Games book that was disseminated to quite a large number of people for the World Games. And we just used the phrase, spread the word for technology equality. And it was really creative. I mean, actually it was a derivative from Special Olympics, spread the word to end the word. But I thought it worked. I'd encourage all of you who are interested in promoting the Declaration to look for opportunities in various media with which you could engage or are engaging, and proposing dissemination activities. Now, this is another ad that we did. It's at the bottom of the beefcake here. And it's what I learned to call now a banner ad. It's less expensive than a full page. And this was slipped inside USA Today a couple of weeks ago. And they said they were doing a special issue on disability, and I'll be darned if they weren't. But they were doing it only on physical disability. They were calling it disability. So we suggested that they might want to consider, the other several million people with disabilities that are included in the area of cognitive disability, and they were very happy and very enthusiastic to do it. So that's what the banner ad is on the bottom. So we're testing at the moment means by which we may be able to get the word out more effectively than strictly through conferences. But where do we really go from here? We've got the Declaration. We've got Tim Shriver turned on about the Declaration, I think, and many of you. And so, but you may be feeling a little bit unsure about, well, where do we go from here? And I think that it's our responsibility here in the Coleman Institute to make some suggestions. And that's what I'm going to do today. Where we need to go is toward implementation. What we need to go toward implementation is Declaration implementation grants. We, the Coleman Institute, needs to break new ground, and instead of exclusively providing grants and resources to faculty to develop technology, which we will have done, of course, and will continue to do, we also need to break out into the community of our nation as well, communities that all of you represent. And we need to provide you with the opportunity to get creative, to get aggressive. And I'm talking about organizations from local small towns to state organizations to national organizations. And I'm talking about having competitions to solicit proposals for the creative opportunities that you see in your state, in your locality, where you could help implement the Declaration. And I think that this is something that we'll be doing for a long time. And we hope that you will be doing it for a long time, because it's only in this manner that we can break through to a new future. I'm really proud of the University of Colorado for permitting the Coleman Institute to do this. This required, of course, the support from Bill and Claudia, which we are greatly grateful for. But it also required the support of the president of the university system. why don't we just keep the money for the faculty? Well, the reason is because the directions that we have taken, and I should say the directions that you have taken and we have followed, have brought us more deeply into the community. And in being deeply in the community, we need to perform in some manner to lead, and to lead with you. And this is what this would be about, because we're talking about you all on the ground figuring out the ways that a modest degree of resources can help you get people together to build a better presence and a better future for the implementation of Declaration and all that it stands for with regard to its relationship to technology and technology implementation. The grants will be competitive. They'll range initially from between $500 and $10,000. We will be working over the course of the next couple of months in terms of breaking out the specifics of this. This is something that is right now is in a form that I can't give you a lot of details on yet. We will review the proposals in the Coleman Institute. So I'm going to need to move on and introduce Claudia Coleman. Claudia Coleman needs no introduction, and Claudia is going to present a couple of awards for us.
Hi, everyone. You know, this conference, I end up crying one time or another, and usually it's Sue Swenson. She always brings it on. She's from Washington, D.C., and she's one of these individuals that just speaks from the heart, and I'm usually just a mess in the front row here. I had no idea Tim Schreiber was going to do that to me today, but he did. So the puffy eyes are all here. I'm delighted to be able to present these are our first two certificates of appreciation from the Coleman Institute to roll up your sleeve, get involved individuals. David Irvin and Bonnie Jean Brooks are wonderful examples of the spirit of the core principles of the Declaration. Through their talent, their connections, their tenacity, they both dove into gaining share of mind and advocating why access to technology is a huge contributor in leveling the playing field. They clearly drove home to their legislatures it was the right action to take. How often do we see state legislatures having a unanimous vote to adopt a joint resolution? Kind of makes you wonder what the actual answer is to that question. Both David and Bonnie Jean have prepared a few remarks that highlight their amazing journey through the Colorado and Maine political system. I will present the certifications of appreciation in order of the date that the joint resolution passed, which I think are really neat. And we hope to, obviously, each year hand out these certifications. So in March, on March 13th, 2014, Colorado unanimously passed a joint resolution thanks to the amazing work of David Irvin. Let me just tell you just quickly a little bit about David. He's the CEO of the Resource Exchange, a Colorado-based nonprofit serving children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He has extensive professional experience in the IDD industry, having worked in or consulted to organizations in the US and abroad. He is a published author and speaks internationally on healthcare for people with IDD and other areas of expertise. David is a contributing author to the Rubin seminal book called Healthcare for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Across the Lifespan. He is currently co-principal investigator for the Powers for ID. This is a telehealth weight management system for adults and intellectual disability project in the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Developmental Disabilities and Health. He is an associate editor for the journal Frontiers in Child Health and Human Development, and serves on the editorial panel for the International Journal on Disability and Human Development. He's also appointed member of the State of Israel's International Advisory Committee for the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development. It's my honor to present to David the Coleman Institute's Certificate of Appreciation. David?
So ever so quickly, I couldn't have said that better had I written it. So really briefly, but I got a great audience, and apologies to the academics. This will make you twitch a little bit. I'm going to do some survey work here, and we're going to use the results of our survey to compel continued work towards a broad, comprehensive recognition of the importance of this declaration. How many people just this morning have sent or received a text, received or sent an email, or contacted a loved one, a spouse, a significant other, a child, just this morning? How many by show of hands? It would have been easier for me to ask who hadn't. How many of you have connected to your work, whether it's an office or a colleague or some connection to work by email, by text, on your smartphone or your tablet? Show of hands. How many people in the last week have purchased something, have made an order, have made a hotel reservation, or connected to some type of commerce on some form of smart technology? People ask me why this is so important to me. It's not just a function of working with the Colorado General Assembly. It's not just Bonnie's work in working in Maine. It is important because it invites people of all abilities into the ebb and flow of contemporary 21st century life. Everybody in the room, or awfully near to it, raise their hand. This is how we connect. This is how we engage in life and how we are engaged in contemporary life. Why is this important? Because we can't possibly sit still knowing that there are people, but for the presence of a cognitive disability, who are not engaged and who are not invited into the ebb and flow of daily life. That's why we do the work we do, and that's why I surely encourage you with every fiber and strength of your being to do the exact same work. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, David, for your comments. Our second certificate of appreciation is for Bonnie Jean Brooks. The great state of Maine unanimously passed this joint resolution on May 19th, 2015, just a few months ago. Bonnie Jean is president and CEO of OHI, a Maine nonprofit serving persons with autism, intellectual disabilities, mental illness, developmental disabilities, and childhood disorders. They also operate a food pantry and a thrift shop. I had to laugh when I read her bio, and I quote, I'm sure a lot of you are going to relate to this, I've received numerous awards and certificates and have been and am on so many darn many committees, task force, blue ribbon panels, you would be bored to tears as I went through them. She graduated from Boston University with a BS in physical education and biological science, and has subsequently done graduate work in special education, learning disabilities, emotional disturbance, and therapeutic recreation at UCLA, Pepperdine, University of Maine, California State University at Long Beach. Bonnie Jean is a guardian of a woman who experiences mental illness, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, and epilepsy. She is a mother of 2 adult children and a grandmother of 2. It is my honor to present to Bonnie Lee Brooks the Coleman Institute Certificate of Appreciation.
Well, thank you very much for honoring the state of Maine and its legislature, and for letting me be the one to actually accept this award. It was not all my doing. It was just my passion and spirit after leaving this conference that brought us to where we are today. I hope that all of you become as inspired as I was when I first heard the declaration and heard David Braddock give it to us. There is something important that I want to say about this. In Maine, we didn't take a hand vote from the legislature. Excuse me. It was a joint resolution. It was unanimously passed. The leadership, excuse me, the leadership of our legislature knew about the declaration. They read it, they agreed to it, and were compelled to encourage the legislature to sign the joint resolution, but there wasn't a hand vote on it. And so I know that there are legislators who don't even know about the resolution. I'd like to stand up here and say they do. We must find a way to have encounters, as Tim Shriver talked about. And I just had one that made me realize this, and it made me sad that we could not have done more, but it made me know we will do more. I invited a state senator to my office just recently because I wanted to talk to him about 2 bills that I think are very, very important that relate to direct support professionals. And he's going to put those 2 bills in the legislature. He asked me what I was doing next. I said, I'm coming here. Why? And I told him about the declaration and thanked him very much for agreeing to vote on that resolution. And he said, what resolution? And I knew that the journey had only begun. But there was one state senator who now knows everything there is to know about that resolution. And he has that resolution in his hand. And I am on a personal mission to meet every single legislator and put that resolution in their hand in the next 12 months. And that's a lot of legislators. Maine's a big state and we get a lot of snow. But I'm going to do that. And I thank you for the inspiration that you have given me, the Colemans, this institute, and my old friend from a long time ago, Dave Braddock. Thank you. Keep on trying.
In your packets, I know David mentioned it, but there is a toolkit. It says State Legislative Toolkit. It just gives some guidelines, talks about the connections, creating your network, identifying champions, and so, it's a huge undertaking. And anything we can do to help you in facilitating this through your legislative we're here to help. I would like to close with just a couple of comments. First, I hate to spout the overused phrase, it takes a village. But it's really true. Each of us have experience, talent, wisdom, and connections that can be applied to advancing the Declaration. We are a community. It's kind of nice, I had written this not knowing what Tim was going to talk about, what David was going to talk about, but they both mentioned the community. And we are a community. And when you look it up in the dictionary, a common definition is a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. I'd like to leave you with a quote from a former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and also the founder of the Common Cause. His name was John Gardner. And in his last speech, his closing comments were just these few words, which I just truly ring true. I keep running into highly capable people all over this country who literally never give a thought to the well-being of their community. And I keep wondering, who gave them permission to step aside? I'm asking you to issue a wake-up call to those people, a bugle call right in their ear, and I want you to tell them that this nation could die of comfortable indifference to the problems that only citizens can solve. Those are really powerful words. They're their ultimate roll-up-your-sleeve, get-involved message. In some way, all of us can help advance the rights of people with cognitive disabilities to technology and information access. David and Bonnie Jean have done their thing with the Declaration, and that's public policy. So my question to you, my challenge to you is, what action can you take for our community? Thank you so much.
Thank you to Bonnie Jean and to David and to everyone who presented this morning. You have seen just a glimpse of what today will provide for you.